Happy Halloween. There you go. You could turn on your mic and do that. You're good to go. Yes, yeah. It's our moment of silence. Okay. I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional unceded territory, the Comox First Nations, that the Comox Waste Management Service includes the Coasalish, Kawakawak, and Nuu-chah-nulth territories. Was I close? Very good. Yeah. You, oops. Okay, call to order and approval of agenda.
Chair, if I may.
Director Banesh?
Thank you. I'd like to move that we bring the
You're muted. 1 sec, we can't hear you.
Testing. Can you hear me? Is that better?
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that we bring the last item on the agenda, the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Emission Inventory and Reduction Strategies, to the top of the agenda. I have to duck out early personally, and just want to make sure we get to it right away. If I could have a second.
CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the directors. The presenter for that particular item, we are expecting them to attend at 10:30. That's correct. And so we would ask for the board, if that's in the board's interest, that we bring that item forward as soon as that presenter arrives, which, as I said, I think is at 10:30.
That works for me. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. Do we have a first? And seconder, discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, the motion is carried. So and that was for the agenda to be approved as amended? Whoa, who's second? We'll give it to Director Mowini. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. In camera.
Second.
So, thank you. I'm old, so you have to, the whole hearing. Apparently I'm dressed as grandpa today for Halloween. Okay, discussion. All in favor in camera? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. We'll do the in camera at the end. Okay, adoption of minutes. Second was Director Wells. Or was that Director Dahl? No, it was Wells. Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Then we go to reports, correct? We're going to reports. Move one. Do I have a second? Oh, that was close. I'll give it to Director Mowini, only because she scares me more. You should.
Me too.
You too. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Speak to that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to introduce Sarah Willey, our Manager of Solid Waste Planning and Policy Development, who will be introducing the staff report of the technical memo, multifamily waste diversion policies. So Sarah, over to you. And then do we have Sarah? Sorry, directors, will just be 1 second while we get the microphone turned on for Sarah.
All right, I think we're on. There we go. Thank you. Good morning through the chair, through the CAO to the chair. Are we getting feedback? Or is that online?
For the people online, please mute. Thank you.
Okay, great. Good morning. Thank you. So I'm here today with Lindsay Eason of Global Affinity. Lindsay's more commonly known as our educator in the community, attending all of the events, but she's a professional communications consultant as well, and so brings a lot of experience and knowledge to our service. Lindsay's going to present on a multifamily pilot that we did this summer with 4 buildings to gain experience in improving education and diversion in those facilities. There we go. It's going to work. And I'll just start with a brief overview and then finish with the strategies that are presented in the technical memo that's appended that is part of what we're bringing forward through the solid waste management plan. So as many of you are familiar, multifamily buildings are a growing segment in the housing sector, far outpacing the growth of single family homes. And while that's definitely a positive thing for the housing and affordability crisis that we're all suffering from, it does pose challenges from a diversion perspective. There is less, there's more anonymity and sort of, less peer pressure in those settings. And it's been shown, time and time again that there's higher contamination rates in multifamily settings than in single family settings. So it's unfortunately a challenge that hasn't been able to be completely tackled yet and has been, approached by other jurisdictions who have, 50% of their population in multifamily with a lot of gusto. So this waste is not always included in municipal curbside contracts, but we do have some jurisdictions that do include there, some of the smaller ones, as well as Comox and Cumberland. And, still contractors generally in the small communities, though it is delivered by the municipal village usually. The waste from multifamily dwellings, as you know, is commingled with the IC&I, so the institutional, commercial, and industrial waste when it comes across our scale. So it is difficult for us to really determine how much is coming across the scale, but using a per capita estimate, we're looking at about 2,000 tons per year of our waste. So it's about 3%. So while it feels like it might be a higher number, those dwellings, tend to have they don't have garages full of stuff. They don't have, backyards full of stuff. So they tend to have fewer items and less consumer behaviors. And so, yeah, we're looking for solutions to improve on diversion, and Lindsay will go through some of the challenges and successes that she had this summer.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for having me here today. So in the summer, we decided to tackle this issue of how do we help multifamily buildings, because a lot of them don't have any support in terms of trying to figure out what is a better solution to recycling and organics. So we sought out 4 to 5 different buildings and put together this pilot, which included a bit of a 12-week program where we would consult with them. We'd do an on-site visit and find out exactly what services they have, exactly what capacity they have for adding more, and where all the residents were at in terms of caring about recycling. Most of them didn't have a way of communicating any recycling info, and space was definitely a constraint, and I'll go into all those in a second. And then we decided to do a waste audit at them all as well and identify what we can do to improve and make some recommendations. So the 4 buildings that we chose, one was in the regional district out by Little River, 2 were in Comox, and 1 was in Courtenay. So those were our pilot buildings that we worked with, and only 1 was quite new. So building 4 is only 4 years old, and they were built with a garbage room. So they had a very keen green team. They had a recycling area set up in their garbage room. Yeah, thank you. And they were focused on maybe seeing what else they can divert and looking into organics at the time. So all these buildings have a 6-yard garbage bin that's either emptied weekly, bi-weekly, and then one of them's emptied every 2 weeks. They're the largest one, the Comox building that had over 100 residents. 2 of these buildings were self-managed, which does make a difference when Strata is fully taking on everything. And then 2 others had a property management company that deals with all the contracts. So as you can see, there's a big variety when you're looking at multifamily with the number of dwellings, the age of the dwelling, the age of the building, and what services they have. So landscapers take most of the yard waste at these, except for the Courtney one where Strata had decided that they were going to do it themselves. And this was all to save money, but it was basically all put on the Strata president to collect and haul. Okay, so the common challenges that we saw at all the buildings were, besides the one that was built in 2020, there's no purpose-built location for waste and recycling and organics. So it's very challenging. Even if some of these buildings wanted to have toters that were picked up, there's no place to put them on the side of the road. And they would consider them an eyesore because within their strata bylaws, everything kind of needs to be hidden and out of sight and look a certain way. And that was more important when they created those rules than having access to diversion. And then getting all of the residents to agree, because usually when you're getting more services, there is a higher cost to that. So we worked out all those individual challenges at all the different buildings and then decided to do a waste audit. Now, the waste audit results were very eye-opening because there was a lot of recyclables that were still ending up in the garbage. So the top line is the recyclables that could go in what single-family dwellings put out at the curb. So that would cold mingling, recycling. So 30% in the Courtney building was ending up in the garbage, even though they had 2 recycling bins. And then the Comox and CBRD buildings also had a lot of recycling, as well as depot-only items. So it doesn't look like too much of a percent, 12 to 15%. However, added up, that is, 45% of their garbage, almost half is actually recyclable. Then there's a few other things that were like light bulbs, batteries, things in there, and then organics. So in the CBRD and the Comox building, they're 34 to 37% of that waste. So about a third was organic material, mostly food waste. Yard waste is collected separately. And then the garbage made up also about a third or a quarter of the garbage. So there's a lot of room for improvement with diversion. So I made up a report on all these results and sent them to the strata to pass around to all the residents. And the feedback was very, they were all very shocked and everyone thought they were doing a good job of recycling. But when you're sharing services and you're assuming everyone who doesn't have recycling on site has to drive all that material to a depot, it's easier to just toss it sometimes. Or there's a lot of education needed in terms of what is actually recyclable and what is not. So that really sparked a lot of interest in, okay, well, can we get all these educational materials? So per building, I created customized education materials. We have stickers that can go on their personal bins. We have handouts and whatever they needed. They also gave me an opportunity to present at their AGM or on like a Zoom call with all the residents, which was also really great. And they could ask questions. And we looked at relabeling the recycling area if they had one and then getting one set up. And it became a priority all of a sudden once they saw that, oh, here's the results of what we're actually doing. Okay, let's put something in place. And in this, when you're talking about costs of adding a service for recycling, you're also saying, okay, well, if you get all of that out of the trash, then maybe you don't need pickup every or twice a week. Maybe you can go to once a week and then there's cost savings on that side. So the building out in the CBRD, this is all they had. They didn't have recycling. And space to put bins was tricky. So they used that education to really put it on each resident to, okay, you actually have to figure out can someone come and pick up your recycling and to separate it, but they're still planning on taking it to the depot. But they are moving forward with a pilot for organics collection. So they put the word out to everybody who wants to divert food waste. And I think 6 residents took them up on it. So they are now piloting that with Earth Warriors Composting, which is a private collection service. The Courtney building, I did personalized door knocking to all the residents to hand out that material, answer any questions in person. And we relabeled their recycling bins, and they have a backyard composter. So we offered them the green buckets to, and after that education of what goes into that backyard composter so that they can start diverting their food waste out of the garbage. And same with the building in Comox. They have no space for common areas. It was just a bone of contention of where to put these organics bins. So they did get approval to have it in one location as a pilot. So one of the 6 buildings is starting organics collection. So if that goes well, it will go to all buildings. And the Comox building here, which already had really good recycling diversion, added 4 large carts so that they can divert more food waste through organics. So prior to this pilot, none of these buildings were doing organics collection, and recycling was so-so. So after the pilot, all the buildings are participating in organics diversion, and all residents are now very aware of what is recyclable and where it should go. So that personalized kind of hand holding really helped. That usually there's like a keen resident on strata council or within the building that just wants that help in guiding how we can do a better job. So that really made a big difference, having those on-site visits. So we really recommended continuing with that effort, and then creating a bit of a guide that addresses all these common issues. And so that can be sent to all stratas, that they can then take those recommendations and try it themselves without needing someone to come, but to have someone there if they needed it. And then work with haulers to really figure out all the nuances of how to get into these places that weren't designed to have curbside or have storage area for bins, and how to figure out how to get pickup service. Okay, I'm going to pass it back over to Sarah. Thank you so much.
So with those lessons learned, as well as research in other jurisdictions, we came forward with a few strategies as part of the technical memo on multifamily diversion. And that was prepared by Abby McLennan from Let's Talk Trash, who's in France. And so I'm presenting on her behalf. One of the strategies, of course, is to just make everybody have 3 bins, which we have already presented. Larry Gardner came and spoke about waste generator source separation and what that strategy can achieve. And within the regional district of Nanaimo, they've already got opportunities for that in the residential sector. So they're really looking more in the IC&I, but for us, it would improve the multifamily. So that's one strategy that, of course, has already previously been discussed. 7A is about planning departments. So Lindsay mentioned the operational constraints that haulers find, and residents as well, when they're trying to expand diversion opportunities. A lot of buildings were built with just the ability to have garbage. It's out of sight. They don't want it. It's a dirty thing. It's challenging to take back parking spots that have already been allocated. So it's definitely something that if we can get ahead of as we move forward, will improve opportunities for decades to come. So looking at collaboration and providing resources to city and regional planning staff, looking at multifamily dwelling developments that are happening and making sure that there's adequate space. So I think it's a little ad hoc right now, but being able to provide them with some formalized suggestions for size requirements based on the number of units, making sure that the trucks can come in and bringing the haulers in to talk to them about that. And any challenges with underground storage or in-room storage, that sort of thing. So low diversion impact, that was really a future benefit more than a look back benefit. So new builds, it's about 16 tons a year is the estimate. a lot of that work is consultation and working with the municipalities and planning staff. So not too onerous and low financial impact. So could be considered a relative quick win. The second strategy is education and outreach. So really building off of the work that Lindsay did this summer, recognizing the amount of effort that it takes. We're not suggesting that we could reach every multifamily building in the kind of level of effort that Lindsay undertook, but we do see that it's important. You know, if it's a passive mechanism, it doesn't feel as though it's going to be effective. So we're proposing to assist about 20 buildings a year, which would be, you know, every building, of course, has a different composition, but around 1,000 dwellings a year, and communicating with those property managers. Certainly, you know, there's different types of multifamily dwellings, right? There's strata owner based generally. And I think Lindsay encountered one that was half rentals and half strata, and, you know, saw some challenges even there. But a full rental building is much more difficult. There's less of a community feel, again, less accountability and ownership sense. We've also got, you know, a lot of resorts type accommodation up on Mount Washington, as well as in some of our beach areas. And then, yeah, we've got just a growing segment of folks that are older that might, you know, have challenges with lifting heavy bins and that sort of thing. So it's unique, and that's really what the challenge is with multifamily. Is single family, you can kind of throw one solution at it and I hope that, you know, it's going to apply to most, but with this it tends to be quite curated. So we're looking at about $25,000 a year to support that level of effort for those 1,000 dwellings a year. And then year after year, of course, we'll be going to different buildings. So the, you know, the benefits will grow. So after about 5 years, estimated about 1,000 tons a year diverted based on those opportunities for organics and for recycling. And this ties in well with an opportunity that Recycle BC is offering, which is on going forward, they're looking to allow for haulers to pick up recycling from multifamily buildings at the same time as they pick up from IC&I. And that's always been their preferred efficient routing, but it hasn't been allowed and it hasn't been funded before. So they're finding ways to fund it, and that should expand opportunities for multifamily buildings to participate in the Recycle BC program. So that'll be positive. And the third strategy is around organics expansion. So we worked primarily with Earth Warriors Composting, which is a small proprietor here locally in the Comox Valley that picks up from businesses and some multifamilies. And, you know, that model worked well because he's a guy who's willing to, you know, really be nimble and change his strategies. Whereas, you know, working with the large haulers, they're not interested in this like one-off pilot situation, right? But when it comes to a full launch, you know, that's where they're going to want a piece of the pie. So what we're seeing is the organics on a small scale can be quite good with a sort of an Earth Warriors model where he's got a bucket and he exchanges the buckets and brings those in. But if you're looking at a 200 unit building, you know, you're not going to be applying 5-gallon buckets. So we're proposing that we allow for bin liners within multifamily segments. That overcomes some of the barriers. And, you know, these people are having to transport it through hallways and elevators and, you know, outside. And they're sharing a communal bin as well. So with single family homes, there's accountability for the inside of your cart. If it gets gross, that's on you. With a multifamily, there isn't that same sense of ownership, and it can deter people from participating if it becomes a really disgusting thing. So you can line the carts themselves as well. And that's something that's being accepted. That material stream is being accepted at Convertis and Nanaimo. So as a way to expand without, you know, significantly impacting contamination rates within our own operation, which is a smaller operation than what Convertis operates. So, you know, we're regulated for 14.5. They're already at 40,000 tons and looking to expand their tonnage. They have more equipment on site. So they have a full-time screener on site. They've just made a significant investment in additional equipment to manage that. They also have in-vessel composting within concrete tunnels, which allows for a higher percentage of those compostable plastics to be managed appropriately. So just trying to find a middle ground, you know, with the cost of management and cost of transportation, but opening opportunities for this segment, which we know quite a few are keen on participating. So we're looking at allowing for the private sector to maybe work with them as a consolidation point here in the valley, but maybe in the Campbell River area, trying to find a private consolidation point for hauling down to Nanaimo. So 3 strategies, and yeah, we're hopeful and looking forward to questions. Thanks.
Any questions? Oh, we've got a couple here. We'll start with, I believe, Director Wells. Top one or the bottom one? Nope. Thank you. Top one. There we go.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity. I guess one of my questions is, I know this was a bit of a pilot and kind of gathering information, but are there actual buildings, do you think, that just due to the way they were designed may have absolutely no way to have bins that could be utilized by the entire, like all the residents?
I think there's a possibility, but every building would have been designed to facilitate garbage. So, if they're on board with reducing the size of the garbage, then we can definitely accommodate some other bins. And then it's working with the haulers to talk about frequency of pickup. You hope that there's a solution for everyone. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Okay, next would be Director McCollum, and that would be seat 17.
Thank you. And thanks for the report. Looks like some great, solutions-based approaches here where we're trying to accommodate the change in housing that we're seeing. And I really like the suggestion of just trying to build on that each year in a kind of reasonable way. So really supportive of that. Also recognizing that, of course, the organics is by far more complicated to assimilate in the same way of the multi-stream that single family is doing. And I appreciate trying to come up with a way that it can work. Utilizing the existing private hauler seems like a great step, and hopefully that is scalable, and perhaps there will be an opportunity for that business to maybe adapt in some way that they can facilitate larger developments. I really agree that having that communal receptacle has a lot of challenges in terms of just being gross, especially in the summer months when the temperature is warm all day. It gets yucky really quickly. But the bin liners, it seems like it could create more problems, confusion in the public, that we have 2 sets of rules as to what can go in a bin in our community. It's complicated enough for people to understand. And then if we start having bin liners available for people in certain complexes and then they can't go in, it just seems like we could be running into another problem there entirely. And I'd also be curious to understand better exactly what kind of volume we would need in that stream to justify driving that much further to another composting facility. So yeah, I guess those are kind of my 2 concerns with that approach, but I do appreciate that there isn't like an obvious solution in that regard. One question this has kind of come up for me a number of times. I've seen them at trade shows, those like countertop units, composting units where they're basically made for apartments, and it doesn't actually compost, but you get this kind of like powdered substance that you can just basically pour on anything. And I know some communities have actually used that as a tool for this problem. And I'm curious to know if we did any analysis on that or have considered doing some kind of pilot program in that regard, because I understand that you can do a bulk purchase, and they're quite a lot cheaper if they come into like a government service than someone going on their website and buying them individually. And just wondering if we've put any consideration into that as a solution.
Yeah, we've been approached by there's a couple of companies that do those. They're sort of on counter dehydrator and blenders. So they finely chop the material and they heat it up to stabilize it so that it doesn't attract fruit flies or smell. But as you say, it doesn't actually compost. So it's it has been used in some communities to reduce the amount of water weight that they're transporting around and to reduce the frequency of pickup. To try and save emissions that way and costs as well. So I think while they are cheaper in bulk, there's still a few $100s each. And, it's a small appliance, so it's going to break. The expectation that we would, continue to support and replace those over time, I think is too costly for us to consider. We'd certainly, encourage or can educate people about the availability of them if they want to take them on. But we have looked at it as part of this, through their presentation, and we followed closely what Nelson's been doing. And they received funding from the Organics Improvement Program, so provincial funding, in order to support the purchase of those units. And their pilot was successful, and they chose to expand. And we'll see how it goes, 5-10 years down the road. But I do think if multifamily folks, want to participate and purchase one of those, it can be a really good barrier. But thank you for your comments earlier too. I take those in.
And one other thought or question on that is, if there was a way for us to do a bulk purchase and not actually buy them for stratas, but as a means of reducing the cost and being kind of an intermediary, that might, for units that is of more interest to the strata, then perhaps for all the other reasons that you listed, why regular organics can be a challenge. Maybe there's a way for us to, because I think those units are, like maybe $400 or so that's a barrier. But maybe if there's a way for us to deliver those where we're not taking on the full cost and providing it, but putting it in the list of possibilities.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Thanks.
Oops, sorry. We'll go to Director Therian.
Thank you. Thank you both for the presentation. I just got curious about the bin liners as well. Like it seems like making it convenient and easy and less gross is going to be the way forward. What would it take to make our facility be able to accept these bin liners? What are they made of? Are they actually compostable, or what's the challenge there?
There's a few challenges. A lot of them stem from the fact that compostable term isn't regulated. So the products themselves can say compostable and be available on shelves, but residents have a hard time telling the difference. So the ones that are BPI certified can break down under certain conditions. The difference between our facility and their facility is they have concrete tunnels. So it's similar to the biosolids composting facility that we have here. And so they can reach higher temperatures and more evenly compost as well, because they don't have edges, so to speak. The conditions within the tunnel are pretty equal. So yeah, we would have to invest significantly to build concrete tunnels, which wasn't in the plan yet.
Okay, thank you.
Director Warren.
Oh, great, thank you. Yeah, I really was happy to see all the great work that was done on this. Couple questions. So in the pilot project, were the multifamily complexes that were selected, did they come forward, or how did you make that selection?
Yeah, thanks for your question. There was a bit of kind of door knocking type of outreach, as well as buildings like strata councils reaching out to either the city or the town or the CVRD and just have questions around hey, I'm on strata council or I'm just a resident and I noticed we don't have recycling. So there was kind of this bulk of buildings that were sort of reaching out, and all of those ended up being part of it. That was more successful because there was already a keen resident that wanted to do something than just sort of blanket like, hey, we have this program, who wants to participate?
Right.
Um,
So most of them were already a little bit keen on the idea.
they started to seek us out, yeah. And so our hope was with the pilot and then trying to target 20 a year, is that we're going to continue getting some people that are looking for that information. And then if we use that with our communications help to publish those results and those wins, then other buildings will start coming forward and sort of build that way. But yeah, it's hard to make someone do that change if they're not already wanting to make a change.
For sure. And it's noted in the report that a third of the RD's dwellings are multifamily. And then of course in Courtney, it's getting close, closer to around 50-50 and growing all the time. So I think it be great to try to, get ahead of things, even if we're just starting with a certain number a year or whatever. And I like the ideas around, obviously, the new buildings in our, we're already having those conversations when multifamily developments come up around this kind of stuff. So it's an easy way to implement, I think. And I was interested in this whole kind of incentive idea and the ambassador piece of it, because you've already got champions in buildings. And there could be some really fun stuff that happens and involving youth as well, because of course youth are already doing this in their schools and are already often keener. So I'm just wondering if you had any further comments around the potential for incentives or kind of competition or sort of neighborhood building kind of aspect to this.
I love that idea. There's definitely room to continue exploring. And we do have a school educator too with youth that always have to take on like capstone projects. That if we got some keen youth and paired that with doing some kind of incentive program, I think that would be really wonderful. So thank you for bringing that up. We'll add that in.
Just one more quick thing, and that was just around qualitative data. Did you seek out any qualitative data? Like, you were saying people were surprised by what they saw. Were people expressing, I guess any information that could be helpful in terms of.
Yeah, that I think moving forward, it would be good to do a survey before and after of all residents of where they think they're at, then do the audit, then show them the audit and kind of do a survey after everything's done. So yeah, we will definitely add that in if we move forward with
sometimes those qualitate that information is, obviously equally as important or sometimes more so.
Thank you.
We'll go to Director Kerr and then we'll go online to Director Arbor.
Thank you, Chair. Fascinating report. I was just like, my eyes were just bugging out looking at some of those numbers. I can't believe how much is not being diverted, just thrown out. It's just staggering. I really think this should be a major focus of this board going forward. I mean, with so many residents that could potentially have an impact on our diversion efforts. I really think we should do this. So I'd like to see that. I don't really have a motion for that, but I'd like to see that more focus of this board on the multifamily properties. My question is about liaising with the planning departments of the municipalities and the CBRD, of course. But I'm wondering are you planning any outreach to the planning departments? Like, here are the stats. Can you consider this, or outreach to councils to maybe incorporate this as part of the new builds? So that's question one. Question two is, are there any grants that current buildings could apply for to like do some like a $5,000 grant or $10,000 grant to like change some infrastructure, build a new enclosure, et cetera, for the current properties? Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not aware of any grants, but we can definitely look and see. I think it's often kind of because the infrastructure is mobile, it doesn't get the same attention that some of the underground utilities do, for sure. And then I'm sorry, your first question. Liaising with councils, yeah. So we did do a round of presentation to councils this year, just updating them on the solid waste management plan process, and it did come up in a few of the conversations. But we can do a more targeted conversation with the planning departments, and that's on the to-do list. I think we've got some great examples from different jurisdictions, not just large ones, of creating some template documents that can be provided to communities. So we know that planning and development departments are super stretched. So we don't want to add to their burden, but even a referral to CSWM, we'd be happy to provide comment and take something off their plate if they're wanting to take advantage of that. So.
Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the report. And I guess it's multiple reports now over the last few months that we see for receipt. And I'm trying, I was going back through some of the past reports and trying to parcel out where our priority action should be. And I know in June we did have the report that was not too much in depth, but that talked about mandatory waste source separation. And as Sarah just mentioned, I always look at RDN for leadership in our region because we're not providing it. And they're bringing in effect their bylaw in January for mandatory waste source separation starting in 2025. And I think it's nice to have pilots and incentives, but if we want to bring down the costs of this service, which since 2018, I think we were planning a new cell, and it's $6 to $8 million, and it's got a lifespan of about 6 to 8 years. So we are just burning money in the service collectively as two regions. Our only chance to bring down the cost of this service is to succeed at diversion. So for me, the pilots, it's not, I guess, aggressive enough, and I'm just wondering, what would be the way to bring about, so I know people don't like a shock, but I like a lot of successful policies these days is when you indicate to the market what's going to happen in the future. So could there be an opportunity to introduce a mandatory waste source separation bylaw that applies to everybody that would come into effect, say, in January of 2028? And it feels like this would focus the minds of all of the multifamily units and all the industrial units and commercial units that don't have a program. Because right now we're just asking for the good graces of people to participate, and we're not making a difference. We're not moving the dial in our diversion. So it's just a question how, as staff put their minds to whether a bylaw like this or is our region just like that far behind that we just where I don't understand how RDN can make these big moves and we can't. So that's basically my question.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Director. The RDN has worked through their solid waste management plan and introduced the concept of waste source separation and licensing. And that was completed, I believe, in 2018. So, when you think of the timeline of having that solid waste management plan submitted in 2018, takes a while for the province to approve it. Then they undertook consultation on the bylaws themselves. Then they submitted the bylaw to the province. They had to do some drafts. It was only approved this year. So it certainly has been leading the way. And I think it's a really interesting approach. And I think we're keen to see how it rolls out in January because it can provide some significant changes. So I think our timelines could potentially be shorter because of the path that they've paved for us. But I think it's similar in that it involves incorporation of those bylaws within the solid waste management plan consultation process, and then some subsequent in-depth consultation with the community and certainly the affected stakeholders. So I think that 2028 might not be impossible, but it will depend, if we submit in 2026, and we don't hear back from the province for 6 months to a year, it just might not give us the time to consult properly with the stakeholders. But those are just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Just a quick follow-up, Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so what I'm hearing is actually good. What I'm hearing is that can this board find comfort that, as you say, those initial bylaws around mandatory waste or that direction will come out of this solid waste management plan for sure at this point?
I know that's that's at the board's purview. So that'll be presented as one of the strategies on the long list, and what moves forward will be through the RSWAC to the board.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, directors, for the question. Before your question, Director Arbor, I was going to interject just to reflect on the tech memo. This is tech memo 7. You're right. There's been 6 other tech memos presented, and there are still a couple of tech memos and background information to come. And then, as Sarah mentioned, the RSPAC, Regional Solid Waste Advisory Committee, that's the public and technical committee that's supporting the solid waste plan review process. We'll be taking a look at the long list of considerations, which are all part of these tech memos that you've been receiving over the past many months. And then it'll be a job of that RSPAC to start to narrow down that long list into a preferred short list. And it's really based on the board's set of criteria and priorities. And we will be coming back to the board in February, I believe it is, to really reaffirm what that criteria is and what those priorities are. And I think from that process, from that reduction of this long list of opportunities, that's where you'll see some recommendations around supporting different priorities and approaches, and it may be that there's specific items out of this particular tech memo that the board adopts, and then we're into that bylaw process as Sarah mentioned. So Vivian or Mark Rutten, if there's more to add around that long list of options and that process, what we see over the coming months, is probably good just to reflect on where we're at right now. This is tech memo 7, but there's still a little bit more background information to come. Vivian?
Yeah, so there's I think 3 more memos that are going to be coming forward. So we want to again make sure that the board has a full purview of the all the options that are available when you consider the path forward in shortlisting the actionable items that we want to actually take to the public. And I also just want to reflect on the comment that was made earlier around the timelines. At the RDN, the consultation in the development of those bylaws, the concepts themselves, took 4 years. And that's for submission in 2018. So there was a lot of work that had to be done in order to bring the industry on board. And the consultation is very much the key component to our solid waste management planning. We want to work with our industry, the industry sectors, and get their buy-in. That is, again, really the key to success for these policies that we're talking about. They are big shifts in the way we manage waste. So again, we want to make sure that the education and all of that is done well in advance, and also in sequence, so that we are following the process. Yeah, so that's it for me.
Any additional questions? No? Okay, thank you very much.
We have our presenter now here for the GHG item.
Okay, the presenter is now here. Okay.
We'll want to get a motion to consider the addendum. Yeah.
Right. Okay, that we need a motion to consider the addendum, please.
So moved.
No, you're too late, Director Bonish, but thanks for trying. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. The addendum was added to the agenda on Monday, the 28th. That's not important, thank you. Comox. Okay, Comox Waste Management Emission Inventory and Reduction Strategy. We have a presenter here today. Can I get a motion for receipt, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, Sarah Willie will be introducing this staff report as well as our presenter for this item. So Sarah, back over to you.
Thank you to the CAO, to the chair. Some of you who've been around this table for a while may recognize Curtis Jung, formerly a staff member here and now with Morrison Hirschfield, who's been recently purchased by Stantec. So they have a very long name. And Curtis is joining us here to present on the emission inventory for the CSWM service, as well as reduction strategies.
Thank you, Sarah. The last time I was here was in 2013, I believe, as a staff member. So I do recognize some of you. It's been a while. So it's good to be back. Thank you for the opportunity to present here. And today, as Sarah mentioned, I will be summarizing the results of a study that we completed looking at the greenhouse gas emissions generated by the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service. So we can get great. It's all working. I figured it out. Just a bit of a background in the scope of the study. The overall objective was to develop a greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategy and really to determine ways to reduce the GHG emissions. The study was divided into 3 parts. Part 1 was looking at the current emissions. And for that, we used the year 2022 to establish the baseline service emissions. Part 2 was looking at developing strategies to reduce the landfill or reduce emissions in general. So once the baseline emissions were known, then the next question is how can those emissions be reduced? We grouped the emissions into 3 categories: from landfill, transportation, and emissions generated due to the facility operations. The last part was looking at the greenhouse gas implications of very specific initiatives. So we won't be talking too much about that in this presentation in the interest of time, but all that information is covered in our memo. That's a photo of the organics transfer station at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. So diving into part 1, as I mentioned, the purpose was to determine the baseline greenhouse gas emissions in 2022 for scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. I'll talk about what scope 1, 2, 3 emissions mean. We divided it into 3 categories: greenhouse gas emissions generated from landfill, emissions generated from the transportation of waste being garbage, recyclables, and organics. And finally, the emissions generated due to the operation of facilities. This is just so everyone's on the same page and to clarify what we mean by scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. This is a fairly standardized term. What we mean is scope 1 emissions are generally the direct emissions generated from the cause and generated from the direct operation of the organization. And so this list here shows what was included in the scope 1 emissions. Includes the operation of the landfill, all the facilities, and the transfer of material between those facilities. We did include one scope 2 emission, which was the emissions due to the electricity used at Comox Strathcona Waste Management facilities. The reason it's scope 2 and it's called indirect is because the electricity is used and the emissions are actually generated elsewhere, not at the facility. So that's scope 2. We did not include scope 3 emissions. Just as a definition, what scope 3 emissions are, it would be looking at the full life cycle of the material. So for example, a scope 3 emission might be the emissions from, say, the textile that was landfilled and the emissions due to the mining of the material to generate that textile. So that's Scope 3, that was not included in our boundary. We focused primarily on Scope 1 and limited Scope 2. Just a quick summary of our overall methodology. I think it's important because there are various methodologies that can be taken and various assumptions. And so I just want to clarify a few key points. We did follow standard ISO 14064 standards for GHG emission inventories. As far as the model boundaries, I did speak to this. We were focused on the Comox Strathcona waste management facilities and the operations directly in control of the service. The greenhouse gas emissions that we looked at were primarily all the main ones: methane, CO2, and nitrous oxide. As I mentioned, we did group the emissions sources into 3 categories: emissions from the landfills, the facilities, and the emissions generated due to the transportation of the waste between those facilities. Quick comment about data sources and some of the assumptions, and just comment about some of the data uncertainty. So whenever we do a greenhouse gas inventory, we do have to acknowledge there's some uncertainty with the data, and some data we have a lot of confidence, others there's a certain level of uncertainty in it. So just comment on this. Some of the landfill emissions, well, the landfill emissions is based on greenhouse gas, landfill gas modeling for the landfill. So there is some level of uncertainty there. We do follow industry standard landfill gas modeling tools, but there is always a level of uncertainty when you do model landfill gas emissions. Other data sources included transportation and from equipment, and we did apply emission factors to estimate the emissions from those sources. And again, we applied industry standard emission factors, but there is still always a level of uncertainty when applying that assumption to a large number of equipment. Now I'm going to dive into the results of the emissions, starting with the emissions from the facility operations. The chart on the left shows a summary of the emissions from facilities, total of around 850 tons of CO2 equivalents per year in 2022. The majority of the emissions were generated from the Comox Valley Waste Management Center in Cumberland, followed by the Campbell River Waste Management Center. And we'll dive into this in more detail in the next slide. Most of the emissions are from mobile equipment, specifically, we'll see on the next slide, but the landfill compactor. That's the workhorse at the facility. That is the equipment supporting the main operations at the site. A few notes. The compost facility at the Campbell River Waste Management Center was not operational in 2022, so those emissions are not included in that second column there. And finally, emissions from remote landfill sites are quite small, as you can see in the table here. So now this is just taking a deeper dive into the emissions generated at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. As you can see, most of the emissions are from mobile equipment. And then if we zoom into that 570 tons per CO2 equivalents per year number even more, we've listed all the equipment there that add up to that number. And as you can see, the compactor is the highest number, followed by the dozer and the excavator used to support operations. There's a nice photo of the waste compactor at the landfill. Just a note on this, the CVRD has implemented software to start tracking the use of that piece of equipment, and that has and is also expected to continue to provide opportunities to reduce idling and fuel consumption of that piece of equipment. So that's a piece of software that's directly integrated with that compactor, and provides real-time data of when is it operating, when is it idle, and we see other communities using this software to really just optimize and run that piece of equipment efficiently. Now we'll be talking about the transportation emissions. In total, the estimated transportation emissions in 2022 were just over 400 tons of CO2 equivalents per year. This graph shows where the emissions came from. Just to clarify, this is the transportation emissions by origin. And so just as an example, as you can see, the bar for Campbell River Waste Management Center is the highest. And the MSW column, what's that showing is that represents the garbage that's being transferred from the transfer station in Campbell River to the landfill in Cumberland. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, I can answer questions later. Next, I'll be talking about the emissions generated at the landfill. And before I reveal the results, we did want to include a few slides just to talk about how the greenhouse gas emissions are generated at the landfill in the first place. I think this is an important point. Many of you may already understand this, but this is just a refresher of how the emissions are generated at the landfill in the first place. So basically what happens is when you place organics in the landfill, when they decompose under conditions of no oxygen, that produces methane. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas, and that's how and has a significant global warming potential. So by that, if the amount of organics in landfill is reduced, then that reduces the amount of landfill gas generation. Landfill gas is generally around 50% methane and 50% carbon dioxide. It does vary, and actually the CBRD is measuring the exact composition of the landfill gas at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. So I believe we have that data to the 0.1% of the exact composition of the gas. This curve just shows the typical landfill gas generation at a landfill, and this is a model, but this has been studied and validated. So essentially, what happens is shortly after the materials landfill, you get a spike in landfill gas generation. After a landfill is closed, you do see a significant decrease over the next 30 years, and that follows it's a first order decay model. It's theoretical, obviously. Nothing looks that perfect in reality, but generally that's what we see. As I mentioned, methane has about a 30 times the global warming potential as CO2 on a 100-year time scale. If you look at a shorter time scale, like 20 years, that number is 80 to 90 times, just because methane, the way the molecule behaves in the atmosphere, it over that initial 10, 20 years, it has the ability to absorb a lot more energy than CO2. But when you extend it over 100 years, that global warming potential goes down. So 30 is a well-adopted number. So with all that being said, how do we reduce landfill gas emissions? Well, there's two primary ways. One is to reduce the source. And by that, I mean reducing the amount of organics landfilled. It's the organics that result in methane generation that result in the greenhouse gas emissions. In theory, if there was no organics in the landfill, no material that could decompose, and it was all inert material, you would not get any landfill gas. And the second way we reduce landfill gas emissions is to collect the landfill gas that is generated and to prevent methane from being emitted to the atmosphere. That's a photo of a landfill gas collection pipe being installed. Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong later. I'm going to take a guess. Maybe it's the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. Okay. I 50-50 there. Provide a bit more regulatory context. Landfill gas collection and management is regulated by the province, and there's also upcoming federal regulations in Canada. In BC, this is regulated under the BC Landfill Gas Management Regulation, which requires that all landfills complete a landfill gas generation assessment to determine how much methane is being generated. For landfills that generate more than 1,000 tons of methane per year, there is a trigger that requires an additional design plan and often active landfill gas collection for those sites, which are often larger landfill sites. The proposed federal regulations, which are proposed at this stage, they're not in effect, has an even lower trigger for when additional measures are needed to monitor and potentially collect landfill gas, and that's 664. So that's the most stringent across the country. So it's definitely raised some attention from all landfill operators and particularly smaller landfill operators. Okay, so with that introduction, here's the results. This slide shows first the landfill gas generation. And just want to be clear that this is generation and not what's actually emitted, because we'll cover that in the next slide. So in total, in all the landfills in 2022, approximately 73,000 tons of CO2 equivalents were generated. This chart shows the amount generated at each site. So you could understand the order of magnitude of the landfill gas generation at the Comox Valley and in Campbell River Waste Management Center compared to the smaller remote community landfills. The reason landfill gas is higher, the generation is higher at Comox Valley is primarily because there's more waste generated or more waste landfill there. Another note is Campbell River landfill was closed in 2022. So we do expect to see the generation declining in the coming years. This is the fugitive landfill emissions. This is what actually counts towards the greenhouse gas emissions that we include in the baseline emissions. And just want to be clear, put a red box around it. The fugitive landfill emissions are all those generated emissions that are not captured or collected. Essentially, it's the emissions that escape to the atmosphere. So in total, the fugitive landfill emissions were just under 40,000 tons in 2022. The reason why you see a big drop in the fugitive emissions from the Comox Valley Waste Management Center landfills as opposed to Campbell River is because there is pretty good landfill gas collection system at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center, and actually it's has a collection efficiency of over 50%, which is well above the national average. So that's quite good, but there's still room for improvement, of course. The landfill gas generation and the fugitive emissions are the same for the Campbell River Waste Management Center. And the reason that is because there was no landfill gas capture system yet in place in 2022. The system is now part-time operational, but as in 2022, that system was not operational. And so that is why the fugitive emissions at the Campbell River Waste Management Center are the same as the emissions that were generated. And we'll be talking about this more as part of the strategies in some upcoming slides. This pie chart shows a summary of all the emissions in 2022. So a total of just over 40,000 tons. About 97% of the emissions are related to fugitive landfill emissions. All those gray pie slices are from landfill. The biggest piece being the landfill at the Campbell River Waste Management Center, followed by the landfills at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. And the two smaller pieces are the emissions generated from transporting waste and operating the facilities and the equipment at those facilities. With all that being said, and before we dive into part 2, looking at strategies to reduce the emissions, we did want to speak about and acknowledge the effort that's gone into reducing landfill or reducing emissions to date. So this is a summary of what's been done. One of the most significant investments is investing in a landfill gas collection system at both the Comox Valley and Campbell River Waste Management Centers. The CBRD has implemented phase closure of the landfill, which includes progressive installation of landfill gas collection. So that has a significant impact on the amount of fugitive emissions that are generated at those sites. The CBRD recently has started monitoring landfill gas generation at the surface of those landfills using a drone that I understand was funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada. So that Sarah sent us some of the results. I thought that looked pretty cool. There'll be a photo on the next slide. I mentioned the software to track vehicle use, specifically the compactor at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. Other efforts include trying to maximize the amount of waste loads, maximizing the waste loads to minimize trips, essentially making sure you haul with a full load as opposed to a half load, so you don't have to take unnecessary trips to haul waste between facilities. Promoting organics diversion from landfill. This is a big one. Any efforts that can reduce the amount of organic waste going to landfill has a significant impact on the amount of methane generated at the landfill. In the last few years, the CBRD established organics processing capacity with the construction of the compost facility in Campbell River, as well as a transfer station in Cumberland to transfer the organics south to north. And finally, the CBRD is diverting and recycling clean wood waste. With that, I'm going to pause to take any questions on part 1 before we dive into part 2. So I'm not sure how we want to take questions, Sarah, but if there's any questions on part 1, happy to answer the questions.
Director Terry.
Hi. I mean, obviously the bulk of this is coming from well, thanks for the presentation first off. The bulk of this is coming from the landfill gas that's escaping, the fugitive gas. The gas that's not fugitive, we're burning that. So where do those emissions, because we're turning methane into CO2, which is obviously 30 times better. But where do those emissions end up in the numbers?
Yeah, I can speak to it, and I will pass it to Sarah to speak. Okay, yeah. So the methane is being flared and also being used in the boiler as part of the leachate treatment plant at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center.
Okay.
So that's what's happening now. So it is being collected and converted to CO2, which has a significantly lower impact than methane.
So, which number though is that?
Oh, that is included in the facility emissions.
That's included in the landfill gas generation on page 13, that slide?
It would be included in the totals where it shows the facility emissions, because what happens is the methane is collected, it's burnt in the facilities at the sites, and so it would be accounted for in the emissions shown for the facilities.
Okay, but the facility emissions only show mobile equipment and boiler. Now, is it all going to the boiler?
Maybe you can speak to that a bit more, Sarah.
Yeah, so it's in the boiler, and then it's also accounted for the flare emissions that are being consumed. So I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't have the paper in front of me to be able to reference the page. But yeah, so there's two sources. One would be from the boiler's consumption and one would be from the flare's consumption. And so they're in the Comox Valley Waste Management Center facility emissions. So it's less than 1,000 tons.
Okay. And then I might be skipping ahead a bit here, but when we get down to the options for trying to reduce some of this, is that the fugitive gas then that these 10 wellheads are going to be trying to capture? Is what's left of the fugitive gas?
That's right. That's right. So a lot of the focus is on what's not being collected now, and that has the most significant impact on the totals, and any effort to reduce what's escaping has the most impact on the overall reduction efforts.
Okay, so then since 2022, have we started flaring gas in Campbell River then?
Yeah, we just began flaring this year in 2024. So we'll see a reduction in emissions already in the Campbell River when we conduct the 2025 inventory.
Okay, so then the option, I think, option 1 and option 5 are the adding these extra wellheads to capture this fugitive gas, and that would be in addition to what we're already doing in Campbell River, and that's why that's so much smaller than what we would get from the Comox facility. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, there's greater gains to be had from the 2022 baseline because there was no collection occurring in Campbell River. So we'll let Curtis speak to the strategies maybe before diving in.
Okay,
So
I'll come back to that. Thank you.
Director.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I can speak to our assumptions around the automated wellheads in Campbell River in part 2, because we did have to make some assumptions around what would happen first.
Director Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question may have been answered because I'm sort of seeing this 2022 baseline, but we're talking about the numbers today might be different. And I think you alluded that Campbell River is part-time working, or what is there is, I guess that number we don't have here, but it'll be coming next year.
Yeah, we've just had some challenges with stable operations. So, and then with it being more remote than the Comox Valley Waste Management Center, response times can be challenging as well. So, in addition to significant supplier challenges that we had early on, by the time we got it commissioned, it still hasn't had the attention and due care that we would like to see as a service. So we're hoping that, with additional resources that would improve. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that.
Okay. Back to Director Terry.
Sorry, if I can, just one more question. Just on the regulations that come in at 1,000 tons of methane, that's equivalent to 30,000 tons of CO2 equivalent?
It's
Is that the number they're using, or?
I don't know the exact number. There's a conversion there. It's more the reason why they present it in terms of methane is that's how, when you model the amount of generation, it's based on the methane generation, but then from that 1,000 tons of methane, you can convert it to CO2 equivalents. So I don't know what the exact number is, but it's a fairly straightforward conversion by applying the global warming potential.
Okay, so we're just over the regulation threshold then, or do we fall within?
It's tons generated, so that's those higher numbers. So we are in Campbell River, it's a little closer to the threshold, but in Comox it's well over the threshold and will continue to be over the threshold. And that 30 number that Curtis referenced earlier, that there's many different publications. There's 25, there's 30, there's 80. So I think that's why it's best practice is to use tons of methane rather than tons of CO2 and do that conversion.
Thank you.
Director Greaves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and fantastic report. I love data. It's fantastic. But I know we alluded, one of the directors alluded to earlier, comparatives to regional district of Nanaimo. And my understanding is that they have a public contract for garbage pickup. Is that correct? I think they, outside of the ICI.
I'm not sure. I don't know if Sarah, you can speak to that or.
You know, they don't have, like we do in rural areas, 3 different garbage trucks, 3 different days servicing the same neighborhood week
Yeah,
after week.
That's right. They have a regional service.
They have a regional service that we voted down twice. Is there any, do we have any idea of what the carbon emissions are from all those private garbage trucks running around, plus 1 recycling one every week? Or is that beyond our purview?
Yeah, that was one of the questions that we posed in part 3 of this study. So we're not going into detail about it today, but the information is available within the report on looking at the emissions from single service versus a combination of a private and subscription and a service, and also the individual trips. So we tried to provide an example representing the population and sort of relative distances of residents around Vancouver Island Area A. So it was just as Curtis says, you have to set boundaries when looking at analysis. So we didn't do it for the entire region, just so you can have that context.
And just finally, it's my understanding that through a solid waste management plan, we can actually maybe move towards a public collection system for recyclables, hey, in the rural areas, and waste as well.
There's a mechanism through the plan to pass that. Yes.
Thank you.
That's everyone.
Okay, thanks for the questions. We'll keep going through this presentation. Part 2 was looking at the strategies that could be implemented to reduce the emissions that we looked at in part 1. That's a photo of the compost facility in Campbell River. Those are the nice looking bunkers and the inside of the building. Oh, sorry about that. So key questions, really, it was looking at, now that we know what the emissions were in 2022, how can the GHG emissions be reduced? Recognizing that most things don't come for free, what strategies provide the best return on investment from a GHG reduction perspective? We did prepare a budgetary cost estimate for the strategies, just so we could look at the cost per CO2 reduced and have that discussion. These strategies, we group them into short-term and long-term strategies. By short-term, we consider that the next few years up to 5 years, and long-term, a strategy that could be implemented in the next 10 to 20 years. We also looked at, in addition to the cost and the CO2 reduction potential, we considered other factors like the operational impacts, technology readiness. Is the technology here and can it be implemented now, or perhaps we'll have to monitor that for the future. Yeah, so those are some of the other factors we looked at. Quick summary of the strategies that we did a more detailed analysis on. There were a total of 13. 4 of those were considered short-term strategies, and the rest were considered long-term strategies. There were 9 strategies we looked at that relate to landfill, and 2 strategies each that relate to the facility emissions and the transportation emissions. This pie chart on the right shows the total potential reductions that we estimated if all of those strategies were implemented. As you can see, hopefully this gives you a scale of the impact. The 9 strategies do add up to about 23,000 tons of potential reductions, which is the most significant. Other 2 strategies related to facilities and transportation result in about 200 to 300 tons of CO2 equivalent reductions per year. This slide just shows that reduction in another way. The 2022 baseline emissions are shown in that first column. In the middle column, that is the potential impact if all of those short-term strategies are implemented, which represent about just over a 50% reduction in the 2022 emissions. And then the last column shows the emissions in 2045, assuming all of the long-term strategies are implemented.
Sorry, we have a question.
Is it okay to ask
yeah,
questions
no
as we go
problem,
along? Thank you. And I just really appreciate this report. I had a question about this, and I'm trying to determine for 2025 which of the strategies are accounted for in that 52% reduction. Is that L7, L9, and L11? So Campbell River, Comox Valley, and the increased staffing?
It is all of the strategies.
Okay, because, and so the staff report, it's hard because the staff report doesn't reference the L numbers, so I'm just translating, but so if option one is to delay action on the Campbell River one for some time, so that would mean we would not hit that 2025 reduction target. That's only possible then with the Campbell River work done as well. Is that correct?
That's right. So this number, it was kind of a high level snapshot. If all of those strategies, those short-term strategies were implemented, this is what the reduction would be. That being said, the reduction would still be significant if, it was only implemented at Comox Valley Waste Management Center. We can speak to the rationale, and I could speak to a bit, and I'm sure Sarah has some thoughts on the rationale for implementing the automated wellheads in a phased approach. But yeah, just for clarity, what this number shows is it takes into account all of the implementation of the automated wellheads at both facilities.
Okay, great. I really appreciate that clarification. Thanks.
Okay, we have one more question from Director McCollum. Keep hitting it. There we
Thanks,
go.
Chair. Yeah, I just picking up on this too. I was a little bit muddled for the same reason, but also there is no full list of the 9 strategies that were considered. There's kind of ones that are picked out and then included as short and long term, and it is hard to tell what the full 9 were that were looked at for the landfill specifically. Some of them are charted, but then they're abbreviated to just a number. So I found that kind of hard to get a full picture, and then what the analysis was. Like, for example, there's a cost to having the landfill operate 1 less day a week, but that's hard to understand because it seems like that would be a saving. So just some of the assumptions and the full list would have been helpful. And then picking up on what Chair Cole Hamilton was asking, what's included in that additional long term? I know there was a bio cover, which again, I wasn't sure what that was because I don't think it's described in the report. But is there other things included beyond that in the further additions that are outlined in the 3rd bar of that chart?
Yeah, so in the next slides, I will go through all the strategies that were considered in the short and long-term reduction totals, and there will be more detail in the report. So I'll go through it in this presentation, try to answer your questions. Hopefully I can clarify as much as I can, and then in the report, there'll be more detail and a description of what those strategies are. Yeah. Any more questions?
Nope, not at this time.
This slide is focusing on the 4 short-term strategies. And so the chart on the right there shows how each of those contribute to the reductions. It is about a 52% reduction from the 2022 baseline emissions. The largest piece, as you can see, is the orange bar, L9, which the way it's described in this report, it's providing sufficient resources to operate the landfill gas collection system full time. The 2022 emissions, as we discussed earlier, at that time, the system was not operational. And so what we assumed in this analysis is that by operating that system full time, you would get a good collection efficiency similar to what we're seeing at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. So that's the 14,000 there. The other L7 and L11 relate to installing automated wellheads at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center and the Campbell River Waste Management Center. Just to provide a bit of a description of what the automated wellheads actually are, they improve the landfill gas collection efficiency. So we did do some research. We talked to some suppliers as well as other communities that have these automated wellheads. And essentially what they do is they monitor the gas concentration, the flow in the landfill gas collection system, and can adjust the flow to optimize the amount of landfill gas that is collected, thereby reducing the amount of fugitive landfill gas emissions.
One moment, please. We have another question from Dr. McCollum.
Thanks for that, Chair. So and just hearing you describe this, I'm realizing that 14,000, like the orange bar, am I correct in that a lot of that has already been realized because this chart is charting the pre-flaring system that we didn't have in place when this model was done? So how much of that 14,000 has already been realized just in the recent improvements that came into effect this year? Like ballpark, I realize it's not part of the modeling, but just for clarity.
Yeah, I believe the system, and Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong, it was operating at about part-time. So, assuming 50% is what we're seeing at Comox Valley, perhaps you'd be getting about 25% collection. So of that 14, hard to say, maybe quarter to half of that perhaps is already being collected. And then with going from, say, 25% collection, doubling that to 50, that's the full amount that would be reduced. Yeah, just that's ballpark. Yeah. Just another point of clarity, I believe this was asked earlier around the assumptions for the strategy L7, the automated wellheads at Campbell River Waste Management Center. We did assume L9 would be implemented first. So the system would be operating full time, and then the automated wellheads would be installed after that. So it was assumption we had to make. It seemed logical that the system, the opportunity with the biggest gains would be implemented first, and then the automated wellheads would be considered after that. So just clarifying that assumption.
Director Cole Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for this. I just so am I right in thinking that with L9, that 14,000 tons there, that the barrier to achieving the full 14,000 is simply a staffing issue? It's not a matter of staffing and maintenance, but it's not a matter of installation of any new services or equipment. It's simply having the staffing available to operate the equipment we already own full time.
Yeah, the system is in place and has potential to collect similar to what we're seeing at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. And so I think from what I understand, the gap is just the resources to operate at full time.
Okay, that seems like the very definition of low hanging fruit. 14,000 tons. It's like 14,000 flights to Toronto. Not that anyone want to visit Toronto that often, but and it just requires taking one person up to full-time staff. Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Director Grieve.
Already this soon? Thank you. I am very concerned with item number 4. When you talk about reducing the operations of the landfill, has anybody ever been up there on a long weekend when there's 10 cars lined up and the gates are closed? So Some of those people, beg your pardon, will actually take their garbage back home, some will not. And we already have a big issue with illegal dumping. And when you look at F3 there, it's only a sliver anyway. So that's the only thing that I have that flags as a concern for me. I think we have to realize that we are here also for the service of the residents. And it's a really big part of that. And if you're going to close it at all, it should be a Wednesday or something like that, because the only day we still live in a 9 to 5, 5-day work week for the most part. So people only have the Saturdays and Sundays to do that kind of stuff. So yeah, that unnerves me, because we work so hard on to reduce leakage and also illegal dumping.
Yeah, I can speak to that, and then Sarah, you can jump in if you want. The greenhouse gas emission reduction potential is one factor that we looked at as part of these strategies. As I mentioned earlier, the other key pieces are the operational impacts to the public, as well as other environmental impacts. So I think with strategy F3, there's other potential more significant impacts, like impacts to the operations and the public, which we want to have that discussion. For our study, we did take a broad review, and everything was on the table just to show what could reduce GHG emissions. But that being said, there's other factors as you're mentioning, and I could understand the concern with other impacts, not focusing just on the GHG reductions.
Sorry, Director Therien.
Hi, similar to Director McCollum, I'm just trying to get a bit of a picture of where we are right now. So the L7 strategy with the extra wellheads in Comox Valley reduce a little over 4,000 tons of emissions, and that would be 4,000 out of the 8,600 that's the fugitive gas in Comox Valley. Is that correct?
That's right. So it would be reducing the fugitive emissions at Comox Valley.
So using a comparable one, then, if we're going to reduce 2,800 tons at Campbell River with strategy L11, is that implying that there's only about 6,000 tons of fugitive gas in Campbell River at this time? About half?
It is not, and I'll have to check the numbers, but it's what we assumed in this scenario is, first we assumed strategy L9 would be implemented in Campbell River, in that, so we have, maybe I'll just kind of walk through the timeline. So there's status quo, 2022 baseline, which there was no collection.
Mm-hmm.
In this assessment, we assumed L9 would be implemented in Campbell River first, as probably the lowest hanging fruit, that collection system would come online and it would reach about 50% collection efficiency. So that number, it would be about, not quite half, but it'd come down significantly. And then from that number, that's where you get L11, the additional reduction based on the collection efficiency running up already at 50%.
Okay, so because 50% of the 28,000 would be 14,000 tons of fugitive gas then. And then if these wellheads can capture half, I'm not sure why we're not seeing a 7,000 ton reduction.
Yeah,
yeah,
I can go through that more.
Or if it's just more difficult to capture the gas in Campbell River, I'm just not
it's
sure.
Not quite half. It's so what we look at when we estimated the reduction due to the automated wellheads is we have to make an assumption around the improved collection efficiency. So it's not quite, applying a 50-50. We'll look at the current collection efficiency that we assume. So for example, at Comox Valley Waste Management Center, the collection efficiency is sitting around 50%. And then based on what we think the automated wellheads how they can improve the collection efficiency. And so I believe it was around 10 to 15%. Then that was applied to the collection efficiency, and that's how we got that number. So it's it's not quite a simple, just kind of like half reduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
There's no other questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Keep going through. So this summarizes all the strategies that we looked at in detail, and these strategies will be summarized. You could refer to the memo to review these in more detail, but I will do my best to explain them here. And if there's any questions, happy to go through them in more detail. So short term, we've talked about L7 and L11 related to installing automated wellheads at the Campbell River and Comox Valley Waste Management Centers. L9 is related to providing sufficient resources to operate that collection system at full time. And then the 6 long-term strategies at the landfill are all listed here. I will note, so L2 to L5, all those strategies relate to removing organics from landfill. And L1 and L12 relate to a potential biocover system, which helps reduce the amount of fugitive landfill emissions at the remote community landfills. And L13, what we looked at is the potential impact of processing organics locally in remote communities. One item I want to mention here is on the scope of this study. And so our focus was on the potential GHG reductions with these strategies. And so we had to make a number of assumptions to estimate the potential reduction. The exercise wasn't to fully define exactly every piece that would be needed for that strategy. Each of these, I would say, is almost a separate study in itself. For example, L2, diversion of organic waste from the ICI sector. That's a comprehensive study and effort in itself. What we set out to do through this study is to provide a number based on a number of assumptions, but also that we could defend and say this is the potential reduction with the strategy. If there's more interest, I think there's a more detailed review that could be looked at. But these numbers provide a basis as a starting point for a discussion. Okay. The 2 strategies related to facility emissions and transportation are listed here. The 2 facility strategies we looked at were converting the existing equipment that are all run on diesel to alternative fuels, electric or hybrid. And then F3, as we mentioned earlier, is reducing the facility operating hours from 7 days to 6 days a week. And the transportation emissions, we shortlisted 2 strategies. T1 was looking at implementing waste compactors in remote communities. The benefit with this is it's in the reduced amount of trips that need to be made to haul out material from the communities. And strategy T2 was looking at the GHG reduction potential if all of those haul vehicles were converted to electric.
We have a question from Director Morin.
Great, thank you. My apologies for not being able to put my finger on it, but could you refresh my memory on the definition of short-term and long-term in terms of timeline?
Yeah, short-term was defined as implemented at the end of 2025. And then long-term was over the next 20 years up to 2045.
Yeah, so that was so it was there was quite a range there. So, and you had said that some of these items are kind of very comprehensive. So, I just, yeah, at some point, maybe just having a little bit more discussion or detail on those longer term strategies and what that looks like. Thank you, to see if any of them can be bumped up.
Right, maybe you're thinking perhaps a bit more of a detailed timeline of, rather than just going from 5 to 20, perhaps a bit more detail or
Break
discussion.
it down a little bit more
Right.
because it is, there's a big difference between 3 years and 20 years. Thanks.
Thanks for the question.
Okay, no other questions at this time.
Thanks for that. This slide just wanted to touch on other factors that we looked at beyond the GHG reduction potential and the costs. Commercial availability was one important factor. One example is the strategies that relate to converting vehicles to electric. We did have several discussions with suppliers of electric equipment, including the equipment suppliers that would supply an electric compactor as well as electric haul trailers. We did get some feedback from a municipality that's looked into electric haul vehicles. And so right now there's limitations of what those electric haul vehicles can do. We did include it as a long-term strategy because we know the electric vehicle market is advancing quite fast. So it's worth considering as a long-term strategy, but short-term, we haven't seen any evidence that it's feasible. It wouldn't be feasible, say, tomorrow to have all electric haul vehicles. Operational impacts is another consideration. Speaks to, we talked about a strategy to reduce facility hours. What would be the impacts of that? The social considerations as well. And finally, just want to mention the environmental considerations. One being the potential landfill airspace savings. And so I think what we're trying to show with this slide is that even though our scope for this study was focused on the GHG reduction potential and the cost, there are other considerations with all these strategies that we want to have in this dialogue. And so while we came in with a, kind of a narrow focus, we understand that there's other potential impacts that all need to be considered with each strategy. This is just a slide on costs. Quick summary of grouping them into low, medium, high. We chose these numbers somewhat arbitrarily. For the strategies, we're estimated that to be below 250,000 to implement. Medium costs under $1 million. There were 4 strategies in that category, and then 5 of the strategies, the estimated costs were over $1 million. Just to clarify, the estimated costs were based on what the cost would be to the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service. And just as an example, what we mean by this, perhaps I'll give the example of the electric haul vehicles transferring waste. Currently, the CBRD contracts that through a private hauler for the example of waste from Campbell River to Cumberland. And so we made assumptions of how implementing electric vehicles would impact the operating contract for that service. We didn't necessarily assume that the CBRD is going to buy electric vehicles. So just a point of clarity on, we had to define the impacts of define the costs that would be borne by the CBRD versus that would perhaps be borne by the private sector or municipalities. And this graph on the right shows the cost per ton CO2 reduced. I won't go through them all, but that just gives you a sense of the potential impact of the strategies from a cost per CO2 reduction perspective. This graph's a bit busy, but it shows the data in another way. The green bar shows the estimated potential GHG reduction, and the blue dots show the estimated cost of that strategy.
We have a question from, I was going to say Director Durian.
Just more of a comment at this point. Just based on these last two graphs, there's really only 4 strategies that seem to make any kind of a financial sense. Once you start getting to $1,750 a ton for cost reduction costs, I think we're pricing ourselves right out of being able to implement any of these strategies. And then to Director Greaves' point, the fourth of those 4 strategies, the one involves shortening hours, and I don't think that's a great way to go either.
Co-Chair Cole Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair Baker. And I found this slide really, really instructive. I mean, for decision making, the return on investment for the various strategies. And as far as I can tell, the payback period, but one can certainly see that anything which reduces fugitive emissions is by far the most efficient way in terms of payback per ton, or like time period it takes to cover it given the internal cost of carbon. And it seems like there's a very, very small difference between L7, which is Comox Valley, and L11, which is Campbell River. It seems to be some like between 0.3 and 0.4. That's like maybe 4 or 5 weeks difference. When we get to the options, I'm not sure if we're talking options at this point. I see you standing there, Sarah. I'm just quite curious about option 5, given it seems very, very similar to the viability of doing the Campbell River piece. Very, very similar to the viability of doing the Comox Valley piece. And I'm just wondering about the idea, why the recommended option was for staging one then the other. I assume that we're already aware of this equipment. We know it works. We don't have to watch it at the Comox Valley site to know that it's doing the job it needs. So it seems to be primarily a staffing resources piece of doing both at the same time. Is that largely the reason, Sarah?
Yeah, the technology is still relatively new. So Vancouver installed it maybe 2 years ago at their landfill with some funding from the federal government. And we had a presentation from their staff, and one of the challenges that they noted, there were 2 major ones. One was integration with IT. So because this is through wireless technology, there were some challenges with IT and making sure that it was secure. So that was a significant barrier. And the other was just around that they found it didn't actually reduce their staffing needs. So they felt like, okay, well, if we're putting in all these robots, it'll really help to reduce the amount of time that our staff are going around and doing the monitoring on a weekly basis. But what they found was the staff ended up spending time fixing the equipment and replacing batteries and, reviewing the data and looking to see how they were performing and making changes. And it didn't actually reduce their resources. They did improve on greenhouse gas, landfill gas collection. So there's definitely some lessons learned. The main employee that was there has recently left City of Vancouver to join the company that installed those wells. And so, I think that's great in one hand, but now we've lost her and her knowledge. So I think we're a bit hesitant. Capital Regional District has procured for, I can't remember if it's 10 or 20 wells just last year, and talking to them, they've had some similar IT challenges. So we anticipate that there will be some struggles and learnings as we go through the process with the Comox perspective. And we already see some challenges in just operating the landfill gas flare in Campbell River in terms of being able to get the same real-time data that we have in Comox, because it's outside of our service area as a CVRD, IT and wastewater and everything. So it's just added some extra. I agree. I think the benefits can be there, but we do first, as Curtis mentioned, really need to put the resources towards making the system as efficient as possible before trying to add on an additional layer of technology. So that was our suggestion, just to try and set expectations for the board that if we're first trying to fine tune Campbell River and get it to as best as we can without the auto tune wells, while learning about the auto tune wells in Comox, that maybe in 2 or 3 years, maybe even less, 1 or 2 years, that we might be able to then move forward with spending that money. And there could also be technology improvements and changes in that time, and so we could be getting even better equipment out in Campbell River. So that was our thought, but we did allocate some consulting help in that option, so to try and overcome those challenges and maybe bring in some expertise from out of the service. So we do feel it is possible. It would, if that's the board's wishes, we can make that the priority and move forward with that if necessary.
And so just to clarify, just the option 5 contains, I think, 50,000 for consulting support too, and that would allow for that that to go ahead without stretching staff capacity beyond, like, that's there to alleviate that staff capacity issue.
I think it could help us to overcome some of those initial challenges, to get the system into a steady state where we could support it internally.
Okay, great, thanks.
Director Kerr.
Thank you. This is a great slide, very helpful in our decision-making process. If we could go back one slide, which is the best slide I've ever seen as an elected official, just a feedback for staff and consultants. This is beautiful because what it does is it's the best bang for your buck, right on the graph, very clear where we should be spending money in the short term. And around this table, some of us are more environmentalists, some of us are more, cost focused and keeping taxes low, but all of us can see this slide and where the best bang for our buck is and where we can spend the least amount of money for the most GHG gas reduction in the future. So I just want to say thank you to both of you and to anyone else involved in putting this together. Very, very helpful. Troy and I have been nerding out over this slide over the last few minutes. And I just want to also say, like, L9, L7, and L11 are just like no-brainers for me personally. F3, that closure, it is a service. The minimal benefit, I would agree. It doesn't make sense to close for such little benefit, even though the cost reduction is so small. So I would be very much in favor of L9, L7, and L11 as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. I will give a lot of credit to Sarah for this slide. We had some back and forth over emails to get this slide to where we are okay with. So I think it was a team effort.
Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just getting back to the process for the automated wellheads and implementing that in 2 locations. And I can certainly understand the rationale of why it makes, the suggestion of first bringing on better staffing to deal with the equipment that we have in place and bringing in more complexity along the way. But my question is just around the procurement of those wellheads. And the flaring equipment took, I think, over 1.5 years to get. And just the idea of hiring the consultant is really only an option 5. But would there be some efficiency in doing a procurement for both sites at the same time and then being able to utilize that consultant resource in both locations? Like, is there not, maybe some efficiencies by looking at the sites together?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think from speaking to Capital Regional District, they only had 1, maybe 2. I think there's only 2 companies, and I think only 1 responded to their procurement. So it's a small market. This particular company that's at both locations, now obviously has staff locally as well. So I think they're gonna continue to probably succeed. But there could be benefits for sure to procuring together. That's fair to say.
Thanks.
Director Grieve.
Yes, finally, this should be just about wrapping it up, I guess. But I see it as a no-brainer. We only have 3% emissions coming from the facilities and operations, and 97% coming from fugitive release of gases. So whatever we can do to double down on that, that's a no-brainer. I would say though that some of us around this table had the opportunity to visit the landfill in Halifax, for the Halifax Dartmouth area, and they've been eliminating over the last 10 years all their organic out of landfill, and there's just a tiny little flare about the size of a candle for the whole area, and that's it, and it's diminishing every year. So long-term curative, get the organics out.
Great. Thank you. No other questions at this time.
Okay, thanks for the questions. I think I just have a few more slides. I'll try to be quick here. This slide does show it's a simplified payback period. What it's based on is the CVRD's internal cost of carbon policy, which in 2024 was set at $170 per ton of CO2 equivalent. And so what we calculated was we estimated a value or cost of a strategy, which if you'll excuse, there's a bit of math in the next few slides, but it's fairly straightforward. We took the potential GHG savings times the $170 per ton, just to have as a discussion point of what is the potential value of that strategy if we're serious about accounting for that $170 per ton. And then the simplified payback period is just taking the cost of the strategy divided by that value that we estimated. So that's how we got that payback period. I did include a sample calculation. I won't go through this. It's in the slide deck, but just so it's clear how we're calculating that payback period. One point I do want to clarify is that this is simplified. Sometimes we do detailed cost models looking at discount rates, inflation rates. That's not considered in this. It's simplified, but it at least gives a sense of the payback period for the strategies.
We have another question from Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just kind of getting back to my earlier comment about, getting a list of what all the strategies were and what's the basis for some of these numbers. One of the ones that I had a hard time understanding was the policy around reducing wood waste. It has a pretty significant cost of 1.5 million, and I'm just wondering what fed into that number, trying to understand why a policy change would be such a costly measure. I think there are some landfills on Vancouver Island that don't accept any type of wood. Just wanted to understand that a little better and why it's so costly.
Yeah, I can speak to this, and if we can also follow up with more information. With this strategy, what we assumed is, and just to clarify, this was a strategy related to diverting wood waste from landfill. Right. So with this strategy, we assumed that the CVRD would be responsible for diverting that material, processing it on site, and then hauling it off site to be processed by a third party. And so those costs do include staff time, additional equipment to process all that material at the landfill site before it is sent to a third party. So I would say those are the bulk of the cost. It's beyond just a policy. Now, that being said, I think there are different ways that wood waste could be diverted from landfill. And one approach, we've seen is through policy, it's really pushed onto the private sector, where all those costs are borne by the private sector. And then in that case, those costs wouldn't be as high for the CVRD. Other communities have decided to take that on themselves. They buy a grinder, they have a separate pad at the landfill site, grind it up, and find an end market, and it's sent there. So there's lots of ways that wood waste can be diverted, and for our assumption, we assume some of those capital costs would be borne by the CBRD to process it before it's hauled off site.
I'll just add a couple comments. So it is for reference the dirty wood waste that strategy references, not clean wood waste. At this time, there's no end market, so even if we were to undertake that, unfortunately, there's nowhere for us to then send it. And so that sort of simpler policy approach of banning that material from the landfill, while that could be done and be lower cost, it would likely be redirected to the private C&D landfill in Campbell River, which doesn't have greenhouse gas collection. So we felt that that was probably not the best approach at this time. So we costed it out in the alternative of taking that in-house.
Other questions?
Director Davis. I did, yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious about the GHG emissions of wood waste in general. And this is a bit of a tangent, but in Tassus, we have thousands of tons of hog fuel around town, several large dump sites, and I don't think anybody's ever monitored them for the emissions from them. I'm just wondering if you can address that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I can try to speak to what happens with wood waste. Is not sure what's happening to it. If when wood waste is landfill, it's organic material, and when it is under anaerobic conditions, it does decompose and does generate methane. It is a organic material, so I'm not sure. You mentioned the wood waste. I'm not sure where it is. If it's all, you're seeing it's all being landfilled, but generally, it's organic material that will contribute to landfill gas.
Yeah, most of it isn't related to our actual landfill site. It's around town, but a lot of it is like 10, 15 meters deep. So it probably would be anaerobic. Yeah.
We have Director Chapman online.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank
Great.
you.
My question is, I mean, it's interesting presentation. And I think Director McCollum was approaching, I think, this question with so many studies and so many assumptions being made. And usually when you're making assumptions to try to come to a conclusion, you usually do, or typically there's a sensitivity analysis being done. And what that means is if one of these numbers is off by a certain amount, how does it affect the whole picture? Have we done any sensitivity analysis at all on any of these models? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and that's a good point. We didn't do any detailed sensitivity analysis in our study. That being said, we have listed all the assumptions that we made, and it's a fairly straightforward exercise to say if we assumed 1 or 2% more or less collection efficiency, what would the numbers look like? So the short answer is, based on the initial study, there was no detailed sensitivity analysis, but that's certainly something that we're familiar with doing in other projects.
Okay. No other questions.
I've already spoke to most of these. This slide is just mentioning the other factors that we considered in the study, like commercial availability. I mentioned the electric vehicles and charging. We conducted a few interviews to understand what's the feasibility, what's the state of the technology now versus what could it look like in the next 5-10 years. Operational impacts. social considerations, and finally, other environmental impacts like landfill airspace savings. So these are all other factors that need to be included in the discussion with all of these strategies. And this slide shows the potential emission reduction targets that we are proposing. This is based on the short and long-term strategies that were in the study, and assuming all of them could be implemented, this is what the potential reduction could look like. So the basis of these targets is from the strategies and the estimated GHG reductions, assuming all of them could be implemented. Just a reminder of the definition of short and long term. One other point to make here is that we also considered decreasing landfill gas emissions in the long-term target, recognizing that as landfills are closed, there's a natural reduction in GHG emissions that isn't related to any strategy. It just naturally happens when you close a landfill. The methane emissions do go down, and the rows below just show the contribution from all of the strategies. And as you can see, it's the largest weight does come from the strategies that reduce landfill emissions. Part 3, we looked at specific scopes of work, and there is a separate memo on this, so I won't discuss it in detail, but just as a summary, we did look at the GHG reduction potential of repair and reuse. We looked at a scenario of different waste collection models. We looked at the impact of diverting organics from landfill with the new compost facility. We looked at alternative fuel vehicles, and we looked at the emissions generated from capital projects implemented by the CBRD. High-level conclusions of the study, just focusing on part 1 and 2. Part 1, the baseline emissions in 2022 were just over 40,000 tons. The majority of those are related to fugitive emissions from landfills. And several initiatives have already been initiated by the CBRD to reduce GHG emissions. So I think it's important to recognize that a lot of work has been done to reduce the emissions. And part 2, a few takeaways. As we've seen, the strategies that result in improved landfill gas collection provide the highest CO2 reduction per dollar spent, and just focusing on those short-term strategies related to ensuring that the landfill gas system in Campbell River is operating full-time, and the strategies related to automated wellheads have the potential to reduce baseline emissions by about 50%. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Co-Chair Cole Hamilton.
Thanks so much. I just had a question about the short-term versus long-term. And the long-term, the 2045 emissions, I think, are only about 7% lower than the 2025 if we implement all of the landfill gas measures. And I'm thinking about the slide which shows landfill gas production declining quite steeply as the years go on. So I'm wondering, would that not have an impact on our 2045 total figures? Because they seem to go down only very slightly from 59 to 52%, 52% reduction to a 59% reduction over the following 20 years. So I guess I'm assuming from this that there are no further actions that could be taken over the long term to reduce landfill gas. And I'm also wondering why, given the decline in production of landfill gas, we don't see a greater projected reduction in the long term.
Yeah, so we, excuse me, we did consider, and I'll go back to, oh, maybe I'm stuck here. We did consider the declining landfill emissions in closed landfills as part of that reduction target. I would say as part of continually monitoring the GHG emissions, it would be, I think that there's always opportunities to improve landfill gas collection. And I think that's where, while the generation does reduce it, even over the, say, short term, it will still be significant. And so I think focusing on collection is the first step. But we did consider the declining landfill gas quantities in the targets, and perhaps Sarah, you can speak to that.
Yeah, I think it's a little easier to imagine if you think of both of them combined. So, we had two, but if you think of our total waste quantities, those are not going down. So while we have Campbell River will have declining gas generation because we're not adding new waste to it, we did significantly increase the amount of waste we're bringing to Cumberland. So the gas generation in Cumberland was based off of decades of putting in, say, 40,000 tons, and now we're going to put in 65,000 tons. So 10 years from now, Comox will theoretically be generating more landfill gas than it is today. So they kind of offset each other a bit in that way. So while we do see a decline in Campbell River, our generation in Comox will stay the same or increase.
Okay. And the other half of the question is, do I also assume from that long-term versus short-term that there are no further significant steps that can be taken to reduce landfill gas, fugitive gas over the long term, given the very small decline after 2025?
Not that we found.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I just want to confirm that.
Online, Director Hardy.
Thanks, Chair. Just going back to a comment that Director Grieve had me mention of earlier with regards to some technology on the East Coast, and just wondering if that's something that we need to maybe go back and reconsider with regards to long-term planning. So if I remember correctly, there's technology on the East Coast, but because it wasn't up to commercial scale yet, the CVRD wasn't seriously considering that technology. But my understanding is that that technology has come up to commercial scale. So I'm just kind of wondering if we should be looking at that from a long-term perspective. Thanks.
Sustained technology.
Yeah, Director Hardy, I think you're speaking about Sustain and the
Yes.
facility in Chester, Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't part of the analysis here in terms of greenhouse gas. It was really about, our operations current. We do continue to follow the progress that they make. And we have actually not Curtis, but a different party at Morrison Hirschfield has been contracted to continue to follow their progress. So it's been limited movement at this time. So yeah, I think that's something that in the future we could consider as part of a larger study. But I think for this, we were really focused on, what we're actually doing and what we could be doing, if that helps.
Director Tyrion.
Oh, could I have a follow-up there, Chair?
By all means.
Thanks. So again, just looking at that, and I see short-term versus long-term, and long-term being 10 years plus. But again, looking at, if I understand correctly, that technology did deal with organics. So I'm just kind of, like I said, I'd be curious as to us getting an update on where they are with that technology, and if that's something that we should be considering moving forward here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Now, Director Tyrion.
Hi, thank you. The board seems to be moving towards the first three options with the biggest reductions. I'm just wondering if there's any grant opportunities, or if we've explored grant opportunities for funding some of this. The amount of emissions that we're reducing, the amount we're reducing is actually, frankly, more than the entire town of Cumberland produces. It seems like there should be grant funding for this kind of volume of reduction.
Yeah, we can pursue it. There has been some opportunities. I know Vancouver's initial purchase was through grant funding, but subsequently they've funded it themselves because of the benefits. So we can look into that.
And then a second question, and I'm wondering if I'm moving towards something that's better discussed and closed or not. But I think it's public knowledge that we may be looking at gas capture and use systems. Would these systems assist in that, or detract from our ability to do that, or how would they fit into possible future gas, like actual gas capture for use rather than just flaring?
Yeah,
Sarah, if you want to speak to to answer the question with respect to the report here in front of us, but then yes, there is some materials that are in closed session, so we'll be mindful of that.
Yeah. So these automated wellheads do align with the beneficial use of gas in that it will help to create a, consistent quality and quantity of gas and an improved quality. So that both Capital Regional District and City of Vancouver are also pursuing beneficial gas use. So there should be no issues.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, there's no other questions at this time. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We're on receipt. So on receipt, all in favor? Oh, Director Harbour, you have your hand up. That means you're in favor.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to move after the receipt.
Thank you. Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Thank you.
Recommendation.
Director Harbour, your hand is still up.
Yeah, thanks. I just heard the comments from Dr. Terrien, and I wanted to propose that we move 1, 2, 3, and 5 as well. I think that it was clear that the value in having that additional one was actually really good value. So I'm just wondering if that could be considered, and if there's a second.
Second is Co-Chair Colt Hamilton. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Sorry. Let's take a 10-minute break, everybody. No lunch. But you get a break. 2 minutes, folks, 2 minutes. Okay, do we have everybody in place? Number 2, Recycling BC. Okay, folks. Just for, I'm sure all of you heard by now, we're going to have pizza coming. Okay, so we're going to try to wrap this up as quickly as possible so you can enjoy your pizza. Recycling BC 2024 contract renewal. Thank you. Second, Director Wells. Discussion?
Want a staff presentation? We do have some brief remarks from staff.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. And Sarah Willie will be providing some brief remarks to this staff report, the Recycle BC contract renewal. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you through the CAO to the chair. For this contract renewal piece, as we mentioned, we've been in significant amounts of discussion and consultation with Recycle BC over the past year. This will be the third contract since their inception in 2012. While it was a robust consultation, we do feel that there's some issues that haven't been addressed that perhaps we can continue discussions with them on if we do execute the extension agreement, which allows us to have until May 1st to continue that conversation. I'm not going to get your hopes up. I think they're pretty steadfast in the language in their contract, but certainly if there's legal risks, I think that's our greatest opportunity for changes rather than financial incentives. But a girl can dream. Our main service, of course, that we provide with Recycle BC is the depot service, but we are cognizant that there's significant impacts on the municipal contracts where single stream recycling has only been offered a 10% increase, whereas recycling picked up in 2 streams has been offered a 65% increase. And while we understand that there's, some rationale behind that, it's not reflective of the study results nor of the industry experience. So with that, we have 2 recommendations to authorize the amending extension agreement to continue to work towards mutually agreeable decision on May 1st, and that we continue to negotiate for higher rates for single stream curbside, more favorable terms, and to work with neighboring regional districts to jointly assess legal, operational, and financial implications as well as risk. I'm here for any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the summary of the staff report. One thing I wasn't totally clear on between option 1 and option 2 is that if we go with option 1 and extend to May 1st, are we still receiving the new rates as of January, or are we delaying seeing that increase?
We will receive the new rates as of January.
Okay. That's basically my only concern. Thanks.
Any additional questions? No? Thank you. Further discussion? No? All in favor? On receipt. Okay, discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Village of Cumberland, official community feedback, plan feedback. Thank you. Director Mawini, second. Discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vivian Shaw, I think, has a few remarks to make on this staff report as well, and we can support this discussion to follow. Vivian?
Thank you. Through the CEO to the board. We will again, this report here is related to the OCP update with the Village of Cumberland. We just want to again acknowledge the great and positive ongoing partnership we have with the staff there, especially as we work together on this buffer zoning issue around the landfill property. We've been collaborating on this for quite some time now, and the village has been incredibly responsive and ensuring that this was integrated into their preliminary plans during the consultation. So the report that's before you, it's not so much intended as advocacy, rather than just the formal documented feedback to form their consultation summary. So as detailed in the report, it suggests that we're recommending that the 450-meter buffer around the landfill, it's technically 500, but 50 of that is actually within the property boundaries. So it only means 450 meters outside of the property boundary. We were hoping to be able to have this incorporated as part of the OCP update around the landfill. So this buffer is required as per the landfill criteria, and it's intended to help reduce the impacts of landfill operations on nearby sensitive uses. So things like residential housing, schools, food processing. It's limited to those sensitive uses. It still allows for heavy industrial type activities as well. Again, this also safeguards the operational integrity of the landfill, and which is really essential for maintaining that in-region waste disposal option here within our valley and staying compliant with regulations. So during their OCP workshop back in May of earlier this year, the proposed buffer, again, 50 meter of which falls within the boundary, it was reflected within the maps that were presented. And I just also wanted to note, there's been a notable 9% increase again in vehicular traffic at the Waste Management Center in Cumberland this year. And it's really clear that the demand on waste management is continuing to grow, making this buffer critical for supporting that potential future expansion. So this designation within the OCP will allow for surrounding lands to be used for appropriate non-sensitive uses. And this will really help us in the future planning of the landfill while maintaining compatibility with the village's long-term land use policies. That's all. I'm here for questions.
Questions, anyone? Director Whitney.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. One thing that I noticed in the report is that it was mentioning that there's a need for effective communication about the benefits and positive rationale for the buffer. So I see that the motion that we have is to send a request or advocate to the Village of Cumberland for this buffer. And I'm wondering if it would be possible to sort of articulate the rationale for its importance within that correspondence, just to provide a start to the publicly explaining the benefits of the buffer.
I think if I can, the staff report contents would form part of or most of that correspondence. So it would use that rationale.
Okay, still on receipt. Any other questions? No. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Recommendation. Thank you. Second, Director Cole Hamilton. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. 2024 asbestos disposal update. Move received, Director Mulwini. Second was Director Kerr. Thank you.
And Vivian will be introducing this report as well. Vivian.
Thank you. This report here, short and sweet, it's to just provide a quick update to the board around the resolution of the local asbestos waste disposal, local asbestos disposal issue that we had earlier this year. So following the temporary suspension of the operations for asbestos acceptance at the Northwind environmental landfill up in Cumberland back in March earlier this year, which was due to just simply an administrative issue with the ministry, which necessitated the alternative disposal option, just really again to make sure that we are safeguarding public health and the environment, specifically illegal dumping of this material. CSWM staff, we partnered with the RDN to secure a 2-year out of region waste exemption for specifically asbestos. This collaboration allowed for the safe disposal of 105 loads, equating to 270 100 kgs of asbestos waste being actually deposited within the 2 facilities in the RDN, while Northwind was trying to sort their RS number with the ministry. So they were able to resume, Northwind was able to resume their operation back in October 14th, actually. And after they were able to meet the ministry requirements, and CSWM has since notified all the commercial contractors and updated our website to inform customers that this service is now being reinstated. Again, this report here again is just to highlight the successful cooperation of CSWM and the RDN in ensuring the responsible management of asbestos-containing materials for our communities.
Any questions? No, still on receipt. Oh, Director Grieve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wonder if it wouldn't be a really good idea for the co-chairs to write a letter from this board to the RDN, thanking them for their, their help in this matter over the past few months.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. On receipt, all in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Number 5. Procedure and remuneration. Easy for me to say. Remuneration bylaw. Administrative updates. Staff to provide a verbal. Thank you. I'm sorry, who's second? Director Kerr, thank you. Questions?
Actually, I think Lisa Dennis, our Manager of Legislative Services, has a brief update on this for the directors. So Lisa, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So through the chair to the directors. So staff did a review of the procedure bylaw. And this is just, it's recommended by the ministry best practice guide that we look at the procedure bylaw once in a while and update references and clarify process. So, and this was an opportunity to have an administrative review and to consider some feedback we've had from directors and from staff and to look at the best practice guide as well as the practices of our municipal partners in comparable jurisdictions. So some highlights of the procedure bylaw proposed amendments include several administrative updates, which is clarifying and adding definitions to confirm the application of the bylaw to our commissions and committees, amending any gendered language, amending reference to the corporate legislative officer to the corporate officers, following an amendment to bylaw number 21, the officers bylaw, and strengthening the procedures for the electronic meetings by encouraging participation with cameras enabled where possible. And then we did proposing an amendment to the delegation procedures. And so this includes allowing the corporate officer to direct a delegation to staff if appropriate, adding the following considerations for the corporate officer's discretion on matters that that may pertain to legal matters, labor relations issues, commercial or political promotion, and repeat delegations within a period of time, and also confining a delegation to their stated subject. As after review at the CVRD board, the number of delegations will remain at 3. So we've presented the bylaw accordingly. So this was referred to the CSWM board from the CVRD board, as is our practice. The bylaw has been given 3 readings by the CVRD board. If we proceed after today, we will move ahead with posting public notification in the newspaper, and it just outlines in a general terms what the changes are. And that's about it. If there's any question, I'll take any questions on the procedure bylaw before moving on to the remuneration.
Director Mulwiney.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lisa. I had a question about the commercial restriction, and I just wondered if that would affect, for instance, here we've had a delegation that, or maybe it wasn't here, maybe I can't remember if it was at our board, but for instance, for Sustain that we were talking about earlier today, which is a commercial operation in Eastern Canada that's regarding solid waste. So would that be considered no longer acceptable if with this new bylaw?
I think the key to these delegation criteria are that they allow the corporate officer some discretion, and the corporate officer may refer to these items if necessary. So I think it just has to be taken on a case by case basis and in discussion with the chairs to come to some agreement. But it's just a tool that's there should it be needed.
Thanks, Lisa. And I see Jake is actually poised to come to the mic if need be, and maybe would have a bit more context to offer. So Jake, our General Manager of Corporate Services.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Chair. Yeah, so in respect of that specific context, the board has been interested in requesting information around certain technologies over time. So in that context, to me, it seems reasonable that we're hearing from a commercial entity around the services they may offer. It's more where it's a proposition the board has not requested information or is not seeking any kind of feedback on a particular service or otherwise, where it feels more like that may rub up against or infringe upon on that kind of general nature to restrict just broad commercial promotion. So in that context, it seems reasonable again that the board would hear from those types of providers, but not just generally broadly without that kind of connection.
Any additional questions? On receipt? Katie? Thank you.
Thank you. And through the chair to the directors, good morning. My name is Katie Powell. For those I have not met before, I'm the manager of financial operations. I'm here to discuss the proposed changes to the remuneration and expense bylaw. The first change noted is to remove section 15, which is accountability. Staff are proposing that directors report on their activities in a more informal manner. Since this section is not easily applied to the CSWM directors, we're proposing that it's removed. The second update proposed is to the allowance and expense schedule, which is Schedule B within the bylaw. The proposed changes include updating the private non-commercial accommodation rate to align with the Government of Canada rate and updating the overnight travel per diem to align with the Government of Canada's incidental rate. Staff have conducted a review of current practices and are also recommending alignment of the meal allowance rates to the federal government rates for breakfast and lunch and 75% of the federal government rate for dinner. Page 3 of the staff report includes a summary of the current and proposed meal rates and further rationale for these proposed changes, while Appendix C provides analysis and comparison of these rates. While it's not noted specifically in Appendix C, I will note now that these rates are comparable with those of the Strathcona Regional District, which are $20 for breakfast, $25 for lunch, and $35 for dinner, with an additional $45 incidental. So total meal allowance of 80, daily total of 125, and these rates were updated at the SRD in 2020. The final update proposed is to Schedule E, which is the eligible kilometrage and travel time. The schedule has not been updated in over 20 years, so it's been reviewed and updated to focus on travel to and from meetings in Courtenay and Campbell River, to add Cayukit to the list of locations and to correct any onerous or outdated travel times and locations. So that concludes the proposed changes, and I'd also be happy to answer any questions.
Sorry, any questions? No? Thank you very much. Still on receipt? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Next. I'm sorry? The status report, correct. Thank you. Thank you. Second, Director Mawhinney, discussion. Director Wells. Oh, let me just.
Thank you, Chair. Just because it's come up a few times today, the plant in Chester that was run by Sustain. There was a motion long time ago that once they were running for a year, that at that point a report could come back to this board to sort of, say, here's how it's running. I don't know if some of the comments today, I don't know if it's actually at that point, but I don't see it on the list, and maybe it got removed, or maybe it was.
Well, actually, if I can, I'll ask Vivian to provide an update on that particular item.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. We have been in touch with, Morrison Hirschfield, who's now Stantec. They were the consultants that were tasked with the monitoring of the facility. They have reached out a number of times over the past year, and there hasn't been any response. Although we do know that they are, still on operation. We do have news stories that obviously indicating as such. But unfortunately, we have not been able to connect to validate that. But based on the last update from, I think it's September of 2022 now, they were at that point, they were just seeking funding or securing additional funding, and they were not anticipated to be in full operation until around this time. But we will continue to follow up and provide updates where we can, when available.
Yeah, much appreciated. Yeah, my recollection is they're always about a year away from being fully operational. So I'm not surprised for sure. So thanks for that update.
Any additional questions? Still in receipt? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Bylaws and resolutions? None. New business? None. We'll just adjourn to the enclosed session. It's a tie. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried.